Welcome, guys. So, if you are interested in regenerative leadership, regenerative business, you're in the right space. I'm going to get a quick show of hands. Who feels like they have a grasp on the term regenerative? Put your hand up. Keep your hand up if you think this is a good term to describe the goal, the objective of where we want to go. Is regenerative the term we want to focus on? Great. And put your hand up if you think, actually, we might misuse it. There are tensions, there are some contradictions. Anyone with some skepticism about regenerative? Wonderful. Well, we are going to touch on all of this. We have an amazing session lined up for you. I'm going to describe this session as a sandwich. We're starting with some gourmet bread in Laura Storm, who's going to open up this session with a short talk on exactly what we mean by regenerative leadership with some great examples. In the middle, we have some organic, some fair trade, some locally sourced filling in the middle of our sandwich. And we have Flavia, we have Sarah Marie, and we have Patrick, who will be talking about the various aspects of this, from being an entrepreneur to an investor, to looking at business education, to looking at activism and personal leadership. And we're going to finish off with the final bit of our sandwich, Ecosia's CEO, Christian. It's going to be exciting. Now, the main thing I want to introduce to you here is that the term regenerative has so many definitions. It includes making sure that it's an economy that restores, renews, and revitalizes. Now, that inspiration comes from nature, because that's what nature does. There is no waste in nature. Nature is focused on rebuilding, on revitalizing. But this is extremely different to the world of business, to the world of finance, where we have to grow market share, profits, earnings, exits, dividends. So the two worlds are going to collide here. Regenerative leadership in regenerative business. With that said, I'm going to introduce our first speaker, Laura Storm. She's been an activist since she is 8. She has built amazing organizations like Climate Change Summit, Sustainia, and more recently, Regenerators. She's co-author of the bestseller, Regenerative Leadership. Please welcome to the Change Now stage, Laura Storm.
Thank you, it's exciting to be here. Let's start by all of us getting up. Because this exciting 3-day summit has just begun. We have traveled from near and far. And we thought it would be nice to just start with a quick grounding meditation, because regeneration is also about feeling good and allowing ourselves to be regenerative human beings. So the invitation is, if that feels good for you, to start by closing your eyes and turn the gaze inward and put your right hand on the area of your heart and the left hand on the area of your belly. And start to breathe deeply into your belly area. Start to breathe deeply. And send yourself some love, some nourishment, gratitude for having traveled here to meet with changemakers from all over the world. And give yourself some nourishment in between, some breaks, some pauses, to ground, to reflect, integrate, so you don't extract yourself while you are here. Bring your breathing with you on this journey. And see if you can calm every cell of yours and ground through your feet. Connect to Gaia below us, the planet that we are lucky to share. And when you're ready, open your eyes and stretch a little. Maybe shake that body. Welcome. So I will share a bit about, just for 15 minutes, what is regenerative leadership? Why do we need it? What is it all about? Before we have an exciting panel discussion about this. So most of you are sustainability professionals, so I guess I don't need to take you through in great depths that we are living through the great acceleration. Since the 1950s, everything from GDP to urban population to ocean acidification to CO2 emissions have been on a very steep increase. We know this, and we know the severe impact that this has on us and our planet. But what is missing from this is the fact that not only have we extracted outer ecosystems, we have crossed 6 out of 9 planetary boundaries that we cannot cross if we want to avoid collapse. We have also extracted our human bodies. We have never been as severely burned out, stress, suicide levels are on the rise, burnout, depression. All of this is interconnected. It's interrelated. It's part of the same challenge. We have extracted our own inner ecosystems as well as Gaia's ecosystems. So our approach, and part of the regenerative approach, is to address this simultaneously and come back to life and apply the logic of life, the wisdom of nature. So the sustainability approach, in my opinion, is not going to cut it. SDGs has served us really well to give us a shared language. But if we want to move from the extraction and being extractors into becoming regenerators, into becoming a regenerative force on this planet, we need to align our ways with the only system that has stood the test of time, which is living systems. We need to start understanding how we can align our ways with life instead of going against life. And that is the essence of regenerative leadership, of regenerative business. We need to shift our level of consciousness. New kind of strategies, new 10-step formulas is not part of the regenerative era. It's not part of the regenerative movement. We need to shift our level of consciousness. We need to learn how to become guardians and stewards of life. So the regenerative business lies on the essence of life. We need to create conditions conducive for life in everything that we do, in how we do business, how we lead, how we redesign societies, systems, and structures. It needs to be based on how can we create conditions conducive for life to thrive. So there is this law of life. There is this inherently regenerative wisdom that is part of all life. Life bangs and thrives thanks to diversity. Life depends on strong interconnected relationship. Life is constantly changing and responding, constantly evolving. Life depends on strong flows of energy and matter. And life is part of a greater interconnected web of life. That's part of that kind of formula that we need to align our ways with. But how can we apply this to leadership? How can we apply this to how we do business? There are many different approaches, but one way is the regenerative business DNA. And it's covering living systems design. How can we tap into fields like circular economy, biomimicry? How can we learn to design our products and services in a way so they align with nature's patterns, forms, functions? Those are fascinating fields already out there for you to explore deeper if that piques your interest. So how can we learn from nature and how we design? Tap into biophilia and how we design our environments, our cities, our buildings. Living systems culture. How do we create thriving, abundant, responsive organizational cultures? Not fear-based, toxic, mechanistic, hierarchical machines. But how do we create living, abundant, responsive organisms? Should be the model we design on. And thirdly, living systems being, what are the qualities we want to nurture within ourselves, in our partnerships, in our organizational cultures? So a regenerative approach is, as I said, it's not a rigid formula. Regenerative, they are weavers of a new era. They are weavers of a new era. So they are not responding to a very rigid formula, but they understand, how can I create conditions conducive for life? In my relationships, in my organizational design, in my products, in my services. So regenerative leaders, they see their organization as an organism, as a living system. It has an inner, an outer, and it has an ecosystemic effect. So a regenerative organization is mapping their living system. They understand that everything from the materials they use in their production, to how they treat their employees, how the culture is based on values that feels nourishing, it's all interdependent, and it all has an impact on society and on life, on Gaia. So let me be very concrete and give you a concrete example. So everything a business does has an impact on the world. So the water that comes into an organization, the food that gets served in the canteen, everything has an impact. And the concrete example I want to give you is through a company that I have worked with. They started a regenerative journey back in 2020. It's a shoe brand company called Vivo Barefoot. And they are not perfect. And I want to put out a strong disclaimer that I don't believe that the perfect regenerative business exists yet. But there's 1,000 of examples of companies that are on the journey. So let's use this as a concrete example. So Vivo Barefoot, they started their journey in the middle of lockdown back in 2020. So we actually started by coaching the entire organization online. And we coached them on regenerative leadership qualities. What does it mean to deeply listen to each other? What does it mean to cultivate nourishing relationship? What does it mean to work in alignment with nature? How would their organization look like differently if they started to be designed on the model of a living system? So they started to test these things in 2020 in nature. They started to test different ways of talking to each other, different ways of interacting. And when we started to work with that organization, there was a lot of toxicity, a lot of stress, a lot of burnout. So they started by creating homeostasis within the organization, within the living system. And then they started to see to map their entire ecosystem. What kind of impact do we have? We use plastic in our production. How about we shift that? Instead of virgin plastic, we start to invest in a bio-based alternative. How about we start investing heavily into regenerative agriculture, because our leather that we use in our production needs to have a positive impact? How about we start to do a leasing model for kids' shoes that are only using their shoes for 6 months? How about we start doing a repair service so you can repair your shoes and you can buy used shoes? How about we create a movement of people all over the world that are kind of passionate about being part of a movement, reconnecting yourself to nature? So all of these things started to blossom from the inside out that has had massive ecosystemic ripple effect. That's part of the kind of mindset shift that we see in many organizations today. That kind of level of awareness that I'm actually part of a greater interconnected web of life. And what we do within this living system has a massive impact. And inner, outer, ecosystemic is part of the same thing. So the employees started to see themselves as part of a living system rather than part of a machine. They started to listen differently to each other, and they started to test, experiment, explore to a greater extent than they had done before. And it has had a massive impact. So in the first year alone, profits increased by 36%. At the same time as their happiness level, they use something called the happiness index. Maybe some of you are familiar with that. But their sense of well-being, their happiness level internally increased also by 36% in the same year. The great thing about this company is they communicate very transparently in their annual reports. So for those of you that have an interest in this, I recommend reading their annual reports dating back from 2020. They have dedicated themselves to also communicate all of their many failures, where they have done really wrong, where they have succeeded. So they have that level of transparency so other companies can follow in their footsteps or tap into inspiration from them. Another example that I wanted to give is a company that is very far from being regenerative. But I wanted to include this as an example of the courage that is needed at the time that we are in right now. So in the summer of 22, a very brave head of sales of Mercedes-Benz vans quit her job because she was fed up by the rigid, mechanistic, toxic culture. She quit her job, and she had been with the organization for 17 years, was very highly liked on an executive track. So her boss was like, "What can I do to make you stay?" And she bravely said, "I want to help lead the way into the regenerative future for this company. I want to help steward a regenerative culture." So he gave her a little budget to do a pilot the first year. They measured on some key metrics in terms of job satisfaction, well-being, efficiency, etc. And all of those metrics had improved in the first year between 67 to 85%, which meant that a momentum was built. And now they're doing a bigger pilot in 17 markets, 700 people are involved, 80 top executives are involved. It's really gaining traction. And what is beautiful about this, it's called New Ways of Working, the project. It's not very known yet. But what is really beautiful about this project is that it's led from bottom up. The employees call themselves a guerrilla movement of love. So they are too trained in ecosystem facilitation, seeing the organization as a living system. What impact do we have on the outer world? But also, how can I take care of my inner ecosystem? How do we collectively start to design a cyclical approach to life where we honor the deep need for a reflective winter? We don't have time for more cases, but I just want to stress that it is a growing movement, a powerful growing movement of regenerative businesses that are stepping into this space. And what they see themselves is ecosystem facilitators, stewards of life. And I launched Regenerators almost 10 years ago now, so I've worked on this transition for quite a while, and before that it was helping companies transition to sustainability. And the one thing that is the main barrier for this transition to happen is not solution technologies, political frameworks, or financial mechanisms. The main barrier that I see in people again and again, especially among executives, is the fear of death. It's a fear of letting go. It's a fear of not having all the answers. It's a fear of stepping down that corporate ladder and entering uncharted territories where suddenly you do not have all the answers. You leave the linear, mechanistic frameworks of yesterday and enter into something where you need to tap into a completely different vocabulary and way of being on the planet. And that's terrifying. So the way that I have spent the past year and a half is to work with hospice workers, understanding death ceremonies in different cultures, because we need to be really comfortable holding space for the energy of death. Something needs to be let go of, something needs to die if we are serious about birthing a new regenerative era. We need to tap into our own ego and see where do I need to let things go that is not serving life? And how can I create conditions conducive for life? But as any metamorphosis, it's super scary. Scientists can detect hormones of fear when the caterpillar is going into the chrysalis phase and entering that metamorphic state. It's super scary, but it's needed. and it's needed for all of us that are present here. Implementing solutions and technologies are not going to cut it alone. We need to hold space for a process of death so new life can emerge. We need to come back to essence. We need to shed layers of colonial conquering, power over, dominating, rigid mechanistic ways of being on this planet. We need a decolonial approach. We need to honor indigenous wisdom. We need to be in right relationship, reciprocity. And we need to tap into this energy that we started out with, the energy of the heart. We need to tap into our own courage. Courage comes from the Latin word, speak your truth through your heart. And if you have forgotten everything I've just said, please take this with you. Dare to speak your truth from the heart. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Laura. Wonderful. Well, what a great way to kick off our regeneration focus session. I'm Erinch Sahan. I work at Donut Economics Action Lab, taking the ideas of the donut and donut economics into the world of business. I'm the former CEO of the World Fair Trade Organization, and a lot of our next discussion that we'll have with our panel will focus on exactly what these tensions can look like and how to navigate the tensions in regenerative business. So I'm going to introduce the panel one by one. Let me begin with Patrick Knodel. He's the founder and CEO of Innovation for Impact, a small impact investment company that invests in purpose-driven founders to drive a circular economy. He's also the CEO of the ChanceMakers Foundation. Patrick, welcome. I'm also going to introduce Marie-Sarah Mailliard. Marie is the co-founder of Paris-based Regen School, dedicated to experimenting with regenerative business models and leadership with business school students. Welcome, Marie-Sarah. And Flavia Maia. She's a climate leader, an Obama scholar, Dalai Lama fellow. She's a co-founder of the Fia de Sol, a Brazilian nonprofit, and a startup dedicated to inner leadership development. Welcome, Flavia. We're going to kick off with a very simple question, actually, that I think we can all reflect on one by one. And Flavia, maybe I can kick off with you first. Where are you seeing examples of regenerative business, regenerative leadership, and what is enabling them? What is unlocking those examples that you are seeing, those rays of hope?
Thank you. Can you hear me well? Examples of regenerative leadership for me, as a climate activist, as someone coming from Brazil, they come from traditional Black indigenous communities, because these are some of the communities who have care as a core value. I'm someone who identifies as a medicine woman in the Latin American tradition. For us, medicine women, stories and our presence are healing, are supposed to make you whole. So for me, regenerative leadership means having this understanding that you, by yourself, cannot be an individual regenerative leader if you don't have a culture, a system that supports you. And I think as long as we don't address the colonial mindset, the extractivist mindset behind a lot of the ways we organize as societies, as organizations, as cultures, as communities, we are not having true regenerative leadership. So the short answer is, let's look to ancestral knowledge. We will find many, many wisdom there.
Thank you, Flavia. I'm going to ask the same question to you, Marie-Sarah. You're working in very much with business school students, in education. Where are you seeing these changes happen, and what is enabling and unlocking these regenerative leadership and regenerative business models?
Thank you. I think there is a good news for me listening to Laura and Flavia, is that we talked about this consciousness about living systems and being part of a living system. And this consciousness, I see it a lot within the youth, so working with the youth, you realize that it's not something that you need to learn as much as something that you need to reconnect to, and that we all experienced, especially as kids. And so when you work with the youth, starting maybe just after high school, you see that students still have this consciousness about living systems, and sometimes they kind of forgot it a little bit, but if you let them express their creativity, express their values, their deep values, within finance courses even, then they come up with innovation, they come up with ideas that are starting to look like regenerative businesses. So I see it in the classrooms.
Wonderful, and we're going to move over to Patrick. And Patrick, when we discussed this, what struck me was what you were doing through investment models. Because we all know that extractive finance can often be this great barrier. But you're designing some new models, new approaches. Can you tell us where you are seeing regenerative business in action, and what is enabling and unlocking this approach through your work?
Yeah, thanks. As I run a charitable foundation and a for-profit investment company, I'm giving, just for the first question, I'm giving 2 examples, one of each. So, for example, we are funding a guy called Yannick in Mali. What he's doing is called Kabaku Academies, and his story is amazing because he came as a refugee from Cameroon to Germany, made all his way up here to university, and saw that the classical education system didn't work for him in Africa because he had all the diplomas but never got a job, and it didn't help him or his family. So he went back to Mali and said, how can I redesign education and what's going wrong so that actually local population can be empowered. And what he designed is Kabaku Academies. So what they're doing is they're bringing together, let's call it modern Western technological solutions with indigenous local knowledge. So the training is based on experience, it's app-based, it's not based on the traditional school system that is essentially introduced by colonial powers to keep people down. So it's actually the opposite what they're doing. And one example is, for example, in architecture. Like today, also when we go to Africa, we build these concrete towers because that's what we do in the West, and they're really fancy. They use a lot of energy, and we need air conditioning, which takes a lot of energy. And people have always built with local materials, with clay and other stuff that keeps cool. So what they're trying. One example is they're trying to bring those things together. So get this indigenous knowledge that's already there and that has been forgotten back and combine it with modern technology, so to empower people. So that's maybe one example I would use from the non-profit part. From the for-profit part, I would use the example of a company that's called Wild Plastic from Hamburg. I've been here with them last year, so their clear mission is to get plastic out of the environment that's already in the environment. Not out of the ocean, but out of the countryside before it gets into the river, before it gets into the sea, because it's in the sea, it's hard to get out again. And so their mission is written down in the company, and the company is steward owned. That means it cannot be sold, and the investors cannot push them towards something that they don't want to do. So they're getting it out. They work with local initiatives. They bring it back and they create new plastic. Of course, they're doing a life cycle analysis and everything. And you can do a lot of things better. Yeah, if you would do it on the ground and recycle and everything on the ground would be better, which is not possible at the moment. So it's also clear that the solution is not perfect, but the mindset within the company, this steward-owned, and the company has a clear purpose. And yeah, investors are supposed to earn some money with it, but there is no unlimited upside for the investor. And this putting it down into the structure of the organization is something that I think is very important, which we can follow up on later.
I mean, what's jumping out to me from this discussion is that there are fantastic ways that business leaders are trying to demonstrate that regenerative models can work. At the same time, we have other forces that are working against us, including extractive models of finance, including ownership models that can very much be a hurdle, very much be a barrier. So my question that I want to ask for all of us, and you can all jump in, is can we have regenerative leadership within extractive businesses in the context of extractive finance?
Okay, then I start. I think it's very hard, to be honest. When I started doing what I do, like in late 2016, I had an idea of what's wrong in the world, but not necessarily of how to do it better. So I started the impact investing part and the charitable part, and I looked at both of these worlds for the past 8 years. And what I see is that you have so many barriers in both worlds that are actually very similar to each other. So let's start with non-profit. In the non-profit world today, you have, and I think everybody who is from an NGO who gets funding here will now nod with his head. So you have two classical things. You have donors that give project-based funding, not unrestricted funding, which means you cannot pay your overhead, which if you're a small local organization is the main thing, because who's supposed to do the work if you cannot pay anyone? Nobody would get to this idea in a business, but in non-profit that seems to be normal for donors. And the second is nobody gives long-term funding. So you can apply for 1 year for something, and again and again and again, and the team spends more time in applying for money than actually in doing the work. And so this is absolutely nuts. And if you walk around and just talk to people who are doing the world, it's not hard to find that out. You don't have to do a dissertation about this. It's very, very easy to see. But still, when I look around our portfolio with around 20 partners, for 90% of them, we are the only donor who's giving unrestricted funding and long-term funding. So it's so obvious. So if you don't have the resources and run in behind them 60% of your time as a founder, how are you supposed to actually provide the impact that you are selling in your fancy marketing? So that's the non-profit perspective, and I think something very similar is happening in the for-profit world. If you have for example, I'm in the startup venture area, so I'll focus on that. If you have a startup that's actually doing something really, really different, for example, you build a model that is based on natural cycles that take 15, 20 years, you won't find funding for that, because venture capital wants to pay back after 10 years latest. So they want to scale fast. It doesn't work. If you build something that involves a lot of machinery on the ground and it's not digital, you cannot scale it fast. Like you have to scale everything. You won't find funding. And if you find funding, then venture capital is so extractive by design that your investors, even if you have good investors, even if you have an investor who is an impact fund, and I'm sure many of them are here, and I have invested in some of those. Even if there are good people in that fund who are doing that fund, what they have to promise to their investors doesn't fit the business model that you're doing. So you're always being pushed and pulled, and you cannot really lead in the way that you want to lead. And that's why I think finding the right structure for investment and for grants that is long-term and that actually fits the natural cycle, and that has what Laura mentioned, the regenerative design that goes around is the main thing to be regenerative, and it's very, very hard to find money with that. It was a long answer, but yeah.
We had the debate preparing this talk, and for me, I think it's R&D. Regenerative business today is at an R&D stage, and we need to maybe take joy in that. And so yes, it's difficult to find the right structural funding to have the perfect regenerative leadership or the perfect regenerative business. And I don't think it's the goal right now to be fully regenerative. What I hear from what you were saying, Patrick, is also something that we are experiencing, is that the worlds of regenerative consciousness and the worlds of business are very separate. And so for the world of business, it's a bit far-fetched. Like when you talk about regenerative business or regenerative approaches, they look at you a bit like, oh, you're this like crazy person who wants to reconnect to nature. And I think that we have a huge responsibility to provide credibility to the approach. And in order to do so, we need to show and be transparent about the failures, be transparent about the complexity of finding the right models, economic models. And it's, I think, in my point of view, possible. We can go a long way as individuals in our organizations. It's not going to be perfect. Yes, finance and people who give you money and fund your companies do have a huge power and they can block you in going the whole way, but you can still show, and Laura had a great example with Mercedes-Benz, at a business unit level, at a very local level, you can still do stuff. And if you show to your organization that at a business unit level it works, people are happier, people are more engaged, you drive, I don't know, client satisfaction up, you have long-term relationship with your stakeholders, then you are already a regenerative leader and you are implementing regenerative leadership. And then yes, of course, we need the structure.
What I love about what I'm hearing in this panel is that we acknowledge that there is regenerative leadership at the individual level, and it can look like a meditation, like the one we just did. It can look like making space for contemplation and self-care, but this is not enough. And this is what I'm hearing all over this panel, is that we have to push for systems thinking. And we have to have critical thinking to really call the problem by its true name. At the root of extractivist business is an extractivist model that has as its core value capital and not care. And if we don't address this, it will be very hard for any of us to be a regenerative leader inside a broken model. And I really think this should be the main message to take away is, yes, I can be a regenerative leader, but how I can push forward change in business, in society, and in the system. Because the whole reason why we even have an expression, regenerative business, is that because we acknowledge that business is not regenerative. Otherwise, it will be just business. So let's hope for a world, maybe on the next Change Now, that it's just business.
And this is, I think, the heart of the matter. And maybe this will be something that you will pick up in lots of sessions, lots of discussions that you have here at Change Now, which is that two things are true. There is something you can do within the extractive structures. There are also regenerative progress you can make. At the same time, we also need to be honest about the deep structural systemic shifts that are needed in the financing model. And maybe when we say leadership, often the way we've designed companies, finance is in the leadership chair. We can talk about CEOs, but if they're not pleasing the quarterly earnings requirements, if they're not pleasing the board that is elected solely to focus on shareholder interests, then they're out. And I've worked with thousands of CEOs over my career, particularly through donut economics, where we ask them, what are the things you know you need to do, but you can't do? Because you're held back by your financial parameters. It's like a straitjacket, the way we've structured companies. So focusing both on the structural shifts and the honesty around this while retaining a hope feels like the central pivot here. But I'm going to pick up on something that Laura mentioned actually towards the end of her presentation around willingness to let die. Because there are lots of very profitable, extractive, degenerative models out there. Opposite of regenerative, degenerative models out there. Fossil fuel companies are making extreme amounts of money. Fast fashion is very profitable at the moment. Big tech that is much more extractive is currently very profitable despite amazing models like Ecosia on the horizon. How do we engage with this? How do we let die those incredibly profitable models while also pushing regenerative ideas?
Well, Laura also talked a lot about courage, and I think that it's the right word, courage to question everything that we've been taught as reality. I mean, economy is a social heritage, and so if you have the courage to question the ultimate goal of a company, which is right now profits and short-term profits, but if you go back to a more conscious capitalism as a first step, then you realize that your company needs first to be useful, and then you go to a deeper level of questioning the usefulness of what you do. And so I think that's the first way to tackle it, to just question the usefulness of what you do as a company, as an organization. And then another, maybe more pragmatic answer is that it's dying. And yes, okay, we still don't have a lot of examples of listed companies falling down, but we start to see, especially in the insurance sector, for example, companies getting serious about the risks of collapse. And I think that it's going to help a lot the regenerative thinking, because it's going to be one of the solutions for to survive. And so it's happening, so we don't need to do a lot about it. We need to build other organizations and other companies to push another economy, but the traditional one is going to collapse in itself.
I don't know if you're familiar with my friend Nate Hagens. He runs a podcast that's called The Great Simplification. Highly recommended, and he always puts it in a way. He says, either we bend the current system towards something new, or it breaks, and then there will be leftovers and something new will arise. And the question is, will we make it by bending? And that's, for me, the question that you're saying here. So if old models die, are people willing to let them die and transfer to something new? And how to address that? I don't have a real answer for that, because let's face it, when we are speaking here, like, this is a bubble. It's a huge bubble, maybe the biggest impact bubble in the world, this event.
It's a glorious bubble.
It's a glorious bubble, yeah, kind of of the old world outside, but it's a bubble. And I often speak at family office conferences and these things, because I think, okay, you have to influence the most wealthy and powerful people to just use their money in a different way. And I'm just giving you one example, and that's this mindset is so deeply rooted, like the beliefs that you grew up with your education system, that the wealth you have, you deserve this. Okay, your father was rich, you're rich, but you deserve this. That's what you've been told all your life. And letting that go is so incredibly hard. So I'm giving you one small example. I gave a presentation half a year ago at a family office event in Zurich, and I gave a presentation about nature as a role model for investments. And like, after the show, it's always the same thing, like, oh, this was so nice, Patrick, best talk, blah, blah, blah. It was so, like, you get all these claps on your shoulder and you feel really nice. Then you keep standing with these people, and then the topic of wealth tax comes up. And within a blink of a second, the whole conversation goes, okay, we have to get our assets out of Germany, because if it was before the election, because if they win, they will provide a wealth tax, and then we're all done. And like, okay, seconds before you told me, and what? Where is this gone? Like, there you see, like, acknowledging something in your conscious mind is one thing,
yeah.
But getting it down to the subconscious mind, that's where we're struggling so much. And when you talk to traditional business leaders, I'm not sure how many of them actually would be able to deal with a word like regenerative at all at this moment.
Flavia.
It's funny when we are in bubbles like this, Western advanced economy, we may have the illusion that capitalism is flourishing in fast fashion and big tech, but someone coming from the front lines of climate change, as I am, in one of the hottest regions on Earth, I'm a descendant of climate migrants. So I experienced climate change firsthand, and I know millions of people who do, and they know that capitalism is broken as a system. So I think we should admit this, and I will quote a Brazilian thinker and doer, a philosopher from Piauí, Antonio Bispo, and he says, every story has a beginning, a middle, and a beginning. And sometimes our Western way of thinking is so afraid of the end. And sometimes what I hear also in Western cultures is, no, but if we do this, it will be so much sacrifice for us as a culture. We will sacrifice our comfort or our wealth, as you just mentioned. But I think we have been forgetting to consider that it may be actually better to let this die. There is another beginning at the horizon.
and maybe just, Patrick, you said we were in a bubble, and you're right. But let's not forget that business as usual is also a bubble. I mean, finance is a bubble. It's very few people benefiting from business as usual and capitalism. And so it's not a huge mountain that we need to let die. It's a very small bubble as well, benefiting from all of this wealth and the millions of people who are working and in the front lines of climate change. They are the numbers. And I think it's giving a bit of hope also for a more regenerative world.
I mean, I'm going to attempt to, in 33 seconds, sum up, I think, some of the bold ideas that we took from all of you, including from you, Marisa. I think that is an incredibly important reminder that the old world is dying. It might not realize it, and it's in its own bubble. And there are things that we can do to drive that transformation from within that. I think, Flavia, from you, we learned just how critical our perspective is, that actually capitalism might look like it's working in the global north, in the global south, for the global majority. Actually, it isn't. It isn't thriving. It isn't flourishing. The impacts of the climate crisis are hitting people already. And a new world has to be born. It needs to be born. And I think from you, Patrick, what we've learned is that we can build alternative structures. We can have steward ownership models. We can have cooperatives, employee ownership, community-owned models. We can have models that serve purpose. But this requires not just the individual leadership, but the structural design, the design around the business of those investment models that are alternatives to venture capital, to private equity, to publicly listed IPO models. So all of these together, I think, weave together the journey that we need to create the regenerative leadership within regenerative business world. With that said, I'm going to ask the three of you to move on as I introduce our next speaker. But round of applause for Flavia, Marisa, and to Patrick. And our next speaker has the shortest of titles, but also the easiest for us to feel energized about. Please welcome to the stage Christian Kroll, the CEO of climate-friendly search engine Ecosia. Christian, welcome. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Now, yeah. Good. Yeah, good morning. So maybe I start with a question. Who of you knows what Ecosia is? Or is... Whoa, that is awesome. I wished we had so much market share in general and not only in this stage. But yeah, for those of you who don't know what we're doing, so we're a search engine. It works like any other search engine. You type in what you're looking for example, if you're looking for a hotel in Paris, and then you get your search results. Like other search engines like Google or Bing, we also display advertisements next to those search results, and when you click on one of those advertisements, then we make money. So far, everything the same. The big difference is that we give 100%, yes, 100% of the profits that we're generating from this to climate projects, especially to tree planting projects. So we're converting land that looks like what you see here on the right side, degraded land, into flourishing ecosystems again. And we're doing this not only because it looks nicer, but because this is really starting a positive cycle. So first of all, we're paying people to plant those trees. We're also giving or planting trees that allow people to earn an income in the future, so really it improves the economic situation. But then we're also, with those trees, we're also improving the local landscape, so helping people have fertile soils again, building up the water cycle again, helping biodiversity. So there's really a positive cycle that we're starting. And above all, if you plant trees that provide what people need, then people don't have to go and cut forests somewhere else anymore. So it's really trying to regenerate the land as much as possible. And of course, trees, not to forget, they are really, really good at removing CO2 from the atmosphere. Actually, if you look at, this might be a bit small, but if you look at the potential that trees have to solve the climate crisis, if you look at what are the top solutions that we have globally to solve the climate crisis, then trees are actually, in some way, trees are part of 12 of the top 20 solutions. So if tree planting is done right, it can actually really solve very, very important problems, including the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis. So what we're trying to do at Ecosia is really to do good tree planting at scale. And when I say at scale, this is, I copied this from our website yesterday. We're currently at 229 and something million trees, so a lot of trees that we're planting. And we're planting them around the world, trying to have the biggest impact that we can have with those tree planting projects. And because tree planting is, if it's done right, extremely efficient at absorbing CO2 from the atmosphere, every search that you do with Ecosia is actually removing around 0.5 kilograms of CO2. So I'm doing probably hundreds of searches every week. That's thousands of searches every year. That's a few tons of CO2 that you're removing from the atmosphere just by changing your search engine. That's really impressive. This doesn't mean that you can now take the plane and fly shopping in the United States for a weekend or something like that, but it is a meaningful contribution, and especially at scale could really be a meaningful change. So sometimes people say, this is too good to be true, and it might sound like it, but what we also do is to basically help people build trust in what we're doing, is we publish our financial reports every month. So people can actually look at our website, see how much we've earned. Like in March, we earned around 3 million euros, and then how many trees we planted, what type of other costs we had. For example, here, taxes, we're paying taxes. This is maybe important. Not every technology company is doing that, so very important element. Those things we're publishing on our website, and then you can actually see where the money goes to. And we have people calling those organizations asking, hey, are you really receiving the money? So building that trust is super important, but we're also not only trying to build trust by publishing something every month. What was also important for me is to make sure that this is guaranteed for the future. So we talked about steward ownership. This is also something that we implemented at Ecosia. Ecosia has given 99.99% of the shares to a purpose foundation, and that foundation holds the shares and makes sure that the company can never be sold and never any profits can be extracted from the company. It also makes sure that we stay true to our mission. So basically what this means is, even if tomorrow you had a big tech company coming around and saying, hey, Christian, here is 10 billion euro, please sell us your company, it would not even be possible to do that. So this is really making sure that for the future, Ecosia will be this independent unit that has solving of our climate crisis at the core of its business. And I think, we've heard a few examples of what you can do if you don't have an extractive owner sitting in the background and managing things, but I want to give you a few examples what we can do with all the money that we're generating if we don't have to pay dividends to shareholders. So maybe to start at the center of our product, when you're using Ecosia, the search engine, you will see that sometimes we highlight very good companies, like here, for example, you have Patagonia with this little green leaf. But we also highlight bad companies, so you can also get a little a coal icon next to your search results if you're a company that is generating a lot of fossil fuels, for example. And we're even blocking some advertisements from companies where we think, like, no, you should not be selling to our customers, like Chinese fast fashion and fast e-commerce and so on. We block those ads, even though we could have earned more money if we allowed them. So this is important. And then we're also, for example, here showing additional information about certain climate relevant topics. So that is investment that we can do. It doesn't really help us earn more money or more profit, but I think it helps our mission. Another thing that we're doing, so running a search engine consumes a lot of electricity. So from very early on, we started investing into renewable energy. And what we realize is that somehow people believe that 100% powered by renewable energy is good enough. I think there is no reason to stop at 100%. Renewable energy is good. You should produce as much as you can. So we're at above 300% renewable energy, and we actually keep adding more renewable energy so that we not only are not part of the problem anymore, but we're actually part of the solution and really putting dirty energy out of the grid. So this is, if you don't have to pay dividends, you can do this instead. and actually we even earn a return on the renewable energy investments that we're doing. Another thing that we did is, so we have a lot of solutions already ready that we can implement and scale up. For example, tree planting, regenerative agriculture, renewable energy, like all those things can be scaled. And most of the climate crisis and other crises can be already solved with the technologies that we have. But there are a few innovations that we would need. And we thought it would be nice if somebody would fund those type of innovations. But yeah, we have limited funds. We can't really invest in all the companies, startups, ideas that we like. So we actually helped incubate a venture capital fund that would invest into climate tech startups. And now this is, I think, Europe's leading venture capital fund in that area. The World Fund, you might be aware of it. I think over 300 million euros now under management that it can deploy into climate startups. And this is something that we helped start. So, I mean, this is, I think, if you have money and you can use it to whatever best impact, then you can do things like that, which I think is really crazy. So we really multiplied the amount that we had available and made something possible that is now much, much bigger than ourselves even. Another thing that we realized was that it's great that we're trying to save the planet, it's great that we're planting trees, financing renewable energy, or innovating in climate tech, but there's still a lot of people who are actually destroying our planet, and those people need to be stopped. So what we do, for example, is finance campaigns that try to stop those types of things, try to stop the destructive economy. So we were involved into the law about ecocide. We protected or helped protect one of a German forest that was about to be cut down by a coal company. And also in France, for example, we're trying to stop the expansion of the highway A69. So those things we also can do. We realized it's not only NGOs who can do that type of work. Companies can do that as well. So if you just have the right mindset, that you can really make this type of change happen as well. And another thing that I think is becoming more and more relevant, we're also investing into European digital sovereignty. So let's just assume theoretically that there was in the United States a president that is going crazy, just theoretical assumption. If that president decided that the tech companies should not give their technology anymore to Europeans, we would really be in trouble. We would have to go back to phone books. There is no digital technology that is owned here in Europe. If you wanted to find out the address of, I don't know, something in Paris, there is no real infrastructure for that is held European. And that, I think, is very concerning. So I hope that the relationships between the United States and Europe will always be good and positive, and that we will have responsible leaders. But if not, then we're currently in a situation where we can easily be blackmailed by the United States, and I think this is not a good situation to be in. It's also not a good situation for us to be in as a company, because we depend on those big tech companies as partners. But I think especially as a European citizen, I'm very, very concerned. So what we did together with our French partner and competitor Quant, we started building up our own European search index. This might at some point become very, very relevant for all of us. Let's see. I hope not, but I think this might be really, really relevant. So I think it's quite interesting what a pretty small company, I mean, we're a 100-people company, not big, what a pretty small company can do if it operates under a regenerative model. For me, I mean, I'm sometimes, so I plotted this to compare our revenue. I didn't forget, can you see the chart? Yeah. So I didn't forget to put in Ecosia. It's just, if you put it at scale, unfortunately, it's not visible. So really, I sometimes wonder, what could we do if we were operating at that size? This is really my dream, to operate a regenerative company at that size. I think at that size, we could really solve many of the world's crises. So I wished I had that many resources. I'm also sometimes jealous of other startups who just raise hundreds of millions, billions of euros on some AI promises that we could also do, but I mean, we're operating under a different model. That sometimes makes things a bit more difficult, but I hope that we build a better foundation so that we don't have to pay dividends to extractive owners at some point. But still, sometimes I'm jealous, and it's not easy to win this type of David against Goliath challenge. So I think this, I mean, this David against Goliath. I think this is really the mental image that we have. This might be very difficult to spot. I actually put things really at scale. So it's not David against Goliath. It's actually us. We're the small ant that is sitting at the bottom of the screen. So that's us if you look in terms of size. But still, somehow, we want to win this competition, right? We want to be one of the leading companies. We want to also offer all the services that big tech companies offer, because we want internet and big tech and AI to be done differently, to be done in a way that's beneficial to humans and the planet. So it's not easy. I'm not saying that. I think I also don't want to give a rosy picture. It would have been easier to just burn millions, but we had to build up the company gradually. And actually, we might need some help. Like building a search index is very, very expensive. I heard that France wants to invest 100 billion into AI. I'm not sure if Monsieur le Président, if he's in the audience. If not, so we are happy to take some of that money. I think we could put good use to it. But otherwise, I think we also have one advantage that the other companies don't have, and that extractive capitalism also doesn't have. We have the hearts, I think, on our sides. We were talking about hearts, and we need every one of you, hopefully, but also many other people to support a company like us, because this is, I think, as long as we're operating in a destructive model, regenerative companies are at a disadvantage, and what it needs is people supporting those companies. So, yeah, I really hope, maybe for the people who are not using us yet, give it a try. Maybe if you're working at companies who are not using us yet, try to convince those companies. And otherwise, we'll do our best, and together maybe we can really get to the scale of big tech companies and have the impact that we could have if we were operating at the scale of big tech companies. This is what I'm really excited about, and I hope we can do that together. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Christian. So, we have heard from across the spectrum of ideas of regenerative business. We've heard from regenerative leadership. We've heard about what regenerative leaders can do even within extractive businesses controlled by extractive finance. We've learned about new forms of regenerative investment and finance that can unlock something very different. And we've heard from Christian what it looks like to build a business from the ground up that is truly regenerative, and all of the things that become possible, even if it isn't maximizing profits. So that dilemma feels very central here in distinguishing between the regenerative that is possible while maximizing returns, and the regenerative that happens anyway, even if it doesn't maximize returns, and that alternative world is being born. If you are interested in the ideas of donut economics, we have a community gathering at 3 p.m. today. Do join us. Have a look at the board to see where it is located. We'll be introducing the idea of the donut, of what it means for the world of business, and how we can drive that regenerative enterprise design, the model of enterprise, the model of investment that can unlock greater ambition, greater transformation overall. Thank you all for coming. We're going to have another design-focused session on this stage. Following this, you have a short break. Thank you. Thank you to all of our speakers and panelists. They were the creme de la creme of regenerative thought leadership. Enjoy your day.